With respect, you wouldn't understand the math.
Dr. Vivian Crane said it with a thin smile, waving the plainly dressed father away from the judge's table, while his 12-year-old daughter stood beside him fighting back tears. Adam Walsh didn't argue. He just smiled. Here's what Crane didn't know. The man in the worn jacket, the one she'd written off as some tutor in over his head, was Dr. Adam Walsh, once one of the most brilliant mathematicians in the country, before he walked away from all of it to raise his daughter alone. They had just failed Lucy on a problem they swore no student could solve. They were about to hand the trophy to their biggest donor's son, and the father they'd dismissed was already walking toward the board. If you love stories where the person everyone underestimates turns out to be the one who changes everything, follow the channel before we go on. This one is worth every minute. The Fairmont Regional Mathematics Championship was the kind of event that photographed well, and that was, if you understood it correctly, most of the point. It was held every spring in a restored theater with good lighting and a marble lobby, and it drew the children of a certain kind of family, the families who hired tutors at rates that would have covered a month of most people's rent, who treated a middle school math competition as an early rung on a ladder that led to the right high schools and the right colleges and the right lives. There were trophies. There was a scholarship attached to the top prize, a real one large enough to matter. There was a local news camera in the back because the championship's director had long ago learned that a photogenic event with children and trophies was worth more in goodwill than the mathematics itself. The director's name was Dr. Vivian Crane, and she ran the championship the way she ran everything, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and an unerring sense of who in any room held the money. That spring, the person who held the money was Bradford Kane. Kane was a developer, the kind of wealthy that reshapes a small city's skyline and expects the city to be grateful, and he was the championship's largest donor by a margin that made every other sponsor a rounding error. He had funded the new scoreboard, the theater rental, and not incidentally, the scholarship itself. He was also the father of a competitor. His son Tyler was 13, a bright enough boy who had been tutored to within an inch of his life, and Bradford Kane had made it quietly, unmistakably clear to Vivian Crane over a very nice dinner some weeks earlier that he expected this to be Tyler's year. He had not said it as a threat. Men like Kane never had to. He had simply mentioned warmly how much he was looking forward to next year's funding conversation and let the sentence do its work. Into this walked Adam Walsh and his daughter, and they did not photograph the way the championship liked. Adam was in his early 40s, unremarkable at a glance, wearing a jacket that had seen a lot of winters and a pair of boots that had clearly been bought for function rather than appearance. He had the kind of quiet that people sometimes mistook for slowness, a stillness that came from a mind that did not feel the need to fill silences. He had driven Lucy to the championship in a car that was 11 years old, and he had parked it without embarrassment between a German sedan and something Italian, and he had walked his daughter into that marble lobby holding her hand because she was 12 and nervous, and it was the kind of thing that steadied her. Lucy Walsh was small for her age and serious in a way that made adults underestimate her, right up until she opened her mouth about numbers. She had qualified for this championship entirely on her own, through the regional rounds, without a tutor, without a prep program, without any of the machinery the other children had behind them. She had qualified because she was quietly and genuinely gifted, and because her father had spent countless evenings at the kitchen table not teaching her tricks, but teaching her to love the thing itself, to find a hard problem beautiful rather than frightening. She did not know that morning exactly how gifted her father was. She knew he was good at math, the way you know your parent is good at the ordinary things parents are good at. She did not yet know the rest, because Adam Walsh had spent 5 years making sure she didn't. 5 years earlier, Adam had been Dr. Adam Walsh, and the name had meant something in rooms far more rarefied than this one. He had been a professor, a genuinely brilliant one, the kind who got invited to give the lectures that other mathematicians canceled their travel to attend. He had solved problems that had stood for decades. He had once been handed one of the more significant honors his field could give a person under 40, and he had stood at a podium and accepted it, while his wife Vera watched from the front row, luminous with a pride she never bothered to hide. Vera had loved mathematics too. That was how they had met two graduate students arguing cheerfully about a proof, and she had kept a worn notebook of problems she found beautiful, long after her own career took her elsewhere. When she died 5 years ago in a spring, not unlike this one, Adam had discovered that the part of him that lived in the abstract, in the clean and bloodless world of numbers, could not survive what had happened in the concrete one. He could not stand at a chalkboard and feel wonder while the person he had shared all his wonder with was gone. And he had a 7-year-old daughter who had just lost her mother and could not afford to lose her father to grief and to a career that ate men whole. So he had walked away. He had left the university, left the honors and the invitations and the name, and he had become simply Lucy's father. He tutored now quietly high school kids who needed to pass, and he did not correct people when they assumed that was the ceiling of what he could do. He had made a decision somewhere in those 5 years that mattered enormously to the morning that was about to unfold. He had decided that Lucy would never compete in his shadow. She would win if she won as herself. She would never wonder whether a door had opened because of her father's name. He kept the name in a drawer, and he never took it out, and that discipline was about to be tested past anything he had imagined. The first insult of the day was small, and Adam absorbed it the way he absorbed most things without visible reaction. They were in the lobby before the morning session, when Adam, glancing at the posted rules for the final round, noticed something in the scoring language that struck him as odd, a discretionary re-evaluation clause that gave the head judge unusual latitude to adjust scores after the fact. He asked about it politely at the registration table, and his question was routed, as such questions were to Dr. Crane, who was passing through. Crane looked at him. She took in the jacket, the boots, the 11-year-old car she'd probably seen him climb out of, and she performed the small, practiced recalculation that Adam had watched people perform his whole life since he stopped looking like a professor. She decided who he was in half a second, and she was wrong, and she had no way of knowing how wrong. "With respect," Crane said with a thin smile already turning away, "you wouldn't understand the math. The scoring is handled by qualified judges. Why don't you find a seat and let your daughter focus?" Adam didn't argue. He just smiled a small private thing and said, "Of course, thank you." And he found a seat, and he filed the exchange away, and he watched. He watched more than Crane would have been comfortable with if she'd known what she was being watched by. He watched the way the judges clustered around certain children, the donor kids, the tutored kids, warm and encouraging, and moved past others with a kind of professional coolness. He watched Tyler Kane's father work the room, a hand on Crane's shoulder. A laugh with a sponsor there, entirely at ease in a place built to make him feel that way. And he watched in the corner a boy about Lucy's age sitting alone with a cheap backpack, and a look Adam recognized, the look of a kid who had gotten somewhere on pure ability and could feel without being told that the room had already decided he didn't belong in it. The boy's name, Adam would learn, was Danny Brooks. He was there on a fee waiver, a public school kid who had qualified the same way Lucy had on his own, and who was being treated by the machinery of the championship as an inconvenience rather than a competitor. Adam watched a judge barely glance at Danny's work while lingering over Tyler Kane's, and something in him, some old instinct for fairness that had nothing to do with his own daughter, took note. There was one person in that building who seemed uneasy about the same things Adam was noticing, and she was young and she was new. Her name was Sophia Bennett, a first-year judge, a doctoral student who had taken the volunteer position because it looked good, and because she loved the subject, and who was discovering that morning that the championship she'd admired from the outside had machinery inside it she didn't like. Adam saw her frown at a score sheet. He saw her start to say something to Crane, and then stop the way people stop when they are new, and the person they'd be contradicting controls their future. He filed her away too, not as a threat, but as the one person in the room who might not be able to live with what he was increasingly sure was about to happen. Then the final round began, and the problem that would detonate the entire day was placed in front of the children. It was a genuinely hard problem, harder than anything else in the competition, and the championship had made a point of announcing it as such. Crane herself introduced it with theatrical gravity, telling the audience that this was the problem that separated the good from the exceptional, that in the history of the regional championship, no student had ever produced a complete and correct solution, that it was included not because anyone expected it solved, but because how a young mind approached the impossible was itself revealing. It was, in short, the perfect instrument. A problem no one was expected to solve was a problem whose scoring could be shaped however the head judge wished, because who could argue about partial credit on the unsolvable? Adam understood all of this the moment he saw the problem. Because Adam saw the problem the way a musician hears a chord, complete and instantaneous. He knew, sitting in the third row in his worn jacket, exactly how to solve it. He knew it was hard, but not impossible, that it yielded to the right insight, an insight most 12-year-olds would never find. And he watched his daughter bend over her paper, and he felt the particular helpless pride of a parent, watching their child walk towards something difficult alone. Lucy solved it. Not the way the answer key solved it. Adam would realize later. She solved it her own way, a cleaner way, actually, a path to the same truth that was more elegant than the official solution, the kind of thing that made Adam's chest tighten when he finally saw her scratch paper, because it was exactly the kind of move Vera used to make finding the beautiful road instead of the obvious one. Lucy solved the problem the championship had sworn no child could solve, and she solved it better than the people who had written it, and they failed her for it. The scores came back at midday, and Lucy's solution to the final problem had been marked incorrect, not partially credited. Wrong. 0. And with that 0, Lucy dropped from the top of the standings where her work should have placed her to outside the medals entirely, and the top of the standings now belonged comfortably to Tyler Kane. Lucy came back to her father with the careful crumpling face of a child, trying very hard not to cry in public. "I thought I got it," she said small. "Dad, I really thought I got it right. I checked it 3 times. She looked at her own hands. "Maybe I'm not as good as I thought." And that, more than anything, Crane had said to him, more than the whole rigged and photogenic machine of it, was the thing that reached into Adam Walsh and closed a fist around something he had kept carefully still for 5 years. Because his daughter was sitting in front of him, doubting her own beautiful mind, apologizing for being right, and she was doing it because a woman in a nice suit had decided that a donor's son mattered more than the truth. Adam took Lucy's scratch paper gently, and he looked at it, and he saw exactly what she had done. He saw the elegant path to the correct answer. He saw a solution that was not just right, but better than the official one. And he saw with the cold clarity that had once made him formidable in rooms far more serious than this, that his 12-year-old had been failed on a correct proof so that a competition could give a trophy to the boy whose father signed the checks. He knelt down in front of his daughter, and he put the scratch paper in her hands, and he said quietly, so only she could hear, "Listen to me, Lucy. You did get it right. You didn't just get it right, you got it right in a way that most grown mathematicians wouldn't have thought of. I need you to hold on to that no matter what happens in the next hour. You solved it. They're the ones who got it wrong." Lucy looked at him, and something in her father's voice, some certainty she had never quite heard in it before, made her stop crying and start listening. "How do you know?" she asked. Adam was quiet for a moment. 5 years was a long time to keep a drawer closed. "Because I know this problem," he said. "I've known it for a long time. And because knowing when a proof is right happens to be something I'm very, very good at." He stood, and he looked toward the judges' table, toward Vivian Crane, and her thin smile toward Bradford Kane, already positioning himself near the stage for his son's photograph. "Stay here with your bag. I'm going to go understand the math." Adam did not storm the judges' table because storming was what they would expect from an aggrieved parent, and an aggrieved parent was the easiest thing in the world to dismiss. He had watched them dismiss him once already that morning. He did not intend to give them the same exit twice. Instead, he did the thing that a professor does, which was to ask calmly and in the correct order for the correct documents. He went to the registration table, and he requested, as was his right, as the parent of a competitor, a review of his daughter's scored solution, and a copy of the official answer key for the final problem. The rules provided for exactly this. A parent could ask to see how a child's work had been evaluated. The volunteer at the table looked uncertain because requests like this were rare, and rare requests got routed upward, and upward meant Crane. But Adam simply stood there, pleasant and immovable, a man with nothing but time. And eventually the paperwork was produced, because refusing to produce it would have required admitting there was a reason to. He took the pages to a quiet corner of the lobby, and he read them the way he had once read the work of doctoral students, which was completely in a single unhurried pass that missed nothing. Lucy's solution was correct. He had known that already, but seeing it laid against the scoring made it undeniable. She had taken an unconventional route. Yes, one that didn't match the answer key's approach. Step for step, but it was valid at every stage, and it arrived at the correct result by reasoning that was frankly more sophisticated than the official path. A competent judge would have recognized it in 2 minutes. A judge who wanted to fail it had marked it wrong by pretending that different meant incorrect, which was either incompetence or dishonesty. And Adam did not think, given everything else he'd watched that morning, that it was incompetence. And then he read the official answer key itself, and he found the thing that turned a suspicion into a weapon. The answer key was wrong. Not Lucy's solution, the championship's own official solution. The one printed and distributed to the judges contained an error, a subtle one, a flawed step, in the middle of the proof that a casual reader would skate right over, but that invalidated the reasoning if you actually followed it. The problem the championship had sworn no student could solve had been accompanied by an official solution that didn't actually solve it correctly, which meant something remarkable and damning. At once, Lucy Walsh had not only solved the unsolvable problem, she had solved it more correctly than the people who had written the answer key and then failed her for it. Adam sat with that for a moment, in his worn jacket in the marble lobby, and he felt the old machinery of his mind lock into place with a familiarity that was almost grief, because the last person who had seen him do this, seen him take a flawed proof apart with quiet precision, had been Vera. Then he went to find the young judge. Sophia Bennett was in a side corridor away from the others, and when Adam approached her, she had the braced look of someone expecting to be yelled at by a parent. What she got instead was a quiet man who introduced himself simply as Lucy Walsh's father and asked her one precise question, whether in her professional judgment she had reviewed the final scores herself, or whether the final adjustments had been made by someone else. Sophia hesitated, and the hesitation was its own answer. And then, because she was young and new and had spent the morning swallowing things that tasted wrong, she told him. The scores had been adjusted. After the judge's initial evaluations, Dr. Crane had taken the sheets for a final review alone, and several scores had come back changed. She named them quietly, watching the corridor. 2 children had been revised upward. Tyler Kane was one. 3 children had been revised downward. Lucy Walsh was one. Danny Brooks was another. I didn't say anything, Sophia said, and there was shame in it. I saw it, and I told myself maybe she caught real errors, maybe there was a reason. But the pattern, she stopped. The kids who went up are the ones you'd expect the championship to want to win. The kids who went down are the ones nobody here has any reason to protect. I've been standing in that room all morning knowing that's not a coincidence and telling myself it wasn't my place. She looked at him miserable. I'm sorry. Your daughter's work was beautiful. I saw it before the adjustment. It was the best solution in the room. I know it was, Adam said gently. I need you to understand something, because what I'm about to do is going to put you in a difficult position, and you deserve to decide with your eyes open. He paused. The official answer key for the final problem is wrong. There's an error in the 3rd step of the proof. My daughter's solution is correct, and it's correct by a better method than the key uses. This isn't going to be my opinion against Dr. Crane's. It's going to be a demonstrable mathematical fact in front of everyone. And once it's on the table, the scoring adjustments stop looking like judgment calls and start looking like exactly what they are. When that happens, the people in that room are going to remember who stayed quiet and who didn't. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. "Who are you?" she asked finally. "Because parents don't talk about proofs the way you just did." And Adam, for the first time in 5 years, took the name out of the drawer quietly for an audience of one. "My name is Adam Walsh," he said. "Before I was Lucy's father, I was Dr. Adam Walsh. I taught this subject at a level well beyond this room. I've refereed proofs for journals, I've solved problems that stood for decades, and I stopped 5 years ago when my wife died because I wanted to raise my daughter more than I wanted any of it." He said it without weight, as a fact she needed. "I didn't tell anyone here that because I wanted Lucy to win as Lucy. But they took that from her when they failed to correct proof to protect a donor's son, and now the only thing left to do is show the room the truth. I'd rather not do it alone. But I will if I have to." Sophia Bennett looked at the tired man in the worn jacket, and Adam watched her recognize the name, watched it land, watched her rearrange everything she'd assumed about the morning around this new and enormous fact. And then he watched her decide which was the thing he had hoped for without being sure of it, because a person's character is not what they believe when it's safe, but what they do when it isn't. "The score sheets are in the judge's room," Sophia said. "The original evaluations and Crane's adjusted versions. If someone with authority asked to see both side by side in front of witnesses, there'd be no explaining the pattern away." She squared her shoulders. "I have access, and I'll say what I saw, out loud, on the record." They had less time than they wanted, because Vivian Crane could feel the ground shifting the way people like her always could. Word had reached her that the Walsh father had requested the answer key, and while she did not yet know what he'd found, she knew that a parent asking for documents was a parent who might make noise in front of the local news camera, in front of Bradford Kane, on the day of Tyler's coronation, was the one thing she could not allow. So she moved to close the day down fast. She sent word that the award ceremony would begin ahead of schedule, that the auditorium should be seated, that the trophies were ready. Get the boy on the stage. Get the photograph taken. Get the result made official and public, and hard to reverse, and let any complaints afterward drown in the fact that it was already done. Adam saw the ceremony being rushed forward and understood the play instantly because it was the obvious one. Once Tyler Kane was standing on that stage holding the trophy, with a camera on him, undoing it would mean humiliating a child in public, and Crane was betting that no one would have the stomach for it. She was going to hide behind the very kids she was using. It was, Adam thought, a genuinely ugly move, and it told him everything about how far she was willing to go. He found Kane first, actually before the stage, in a calculated choice. Bradford Kane was standing near the wings, pleased and expansive, and when Adam approached him and said quietly that there was a problem with the final scoring that the championship was going to have to address, Kane looked at him with the particular contempt of a wealthy man being inconvenienced by someone he'd priced at nothing. "You're the tutor," Kane said. It wasn't quite a question. "Look, I understand. Your kid had a rough day. It happens. But this is a serious competition, and the scoring is done by experts, and I'd think very carefully if I were you about making a scene you can't back up. People remember the parent who couldn't handle their kid losing." He smiled, not warmly. "You wouldn't want to embarrass her more than she's already been embarrassed." "You're the second person today to tell me I wouldn't understand," Adam said evenly. "I'd hold on to that thought." And he walked past Kane toward the auditorium, and Kane, who was used to being the largest force in any room, felt for the first time that morning a small, unfamiliar flicker of uncertainty, because the tutor had not been afraid of him, and men who were not afraid of Bradford Kane were rare enough to be worth worrying about. Inside the auditorium, the seats were filling. Adam took a moment in the back to look at his daughter, who was sitting where he'd left her, clutching her bag, watching him cross the room, with an expression caught between hope and the fear that hope would make it worse. He gave her a small nod, the kind that had meant, "I've got this across 1,000 smaller crises of a small girl's life." And he saw her chin lift just slightly. And he thought about Vera, because he could not help it in a room full of the mathematics they had loved together. Vera would have been out of her seat an hour ago. Vera had never in her life watched an injustice quietly, and she would have been incandescent at what had been done to their daughter. And Adam realized, standing in the back of that theater, that the 5 years he'd spent keeping his gift in a drawer had been in some way he hadn't let himself examine, a way of staying frozen, of keeping the part of himself that Vera had loved sealed away, because using it meant feeling the full shape of her absence. He had told himself he'd walked away for Lucy. Some of it, he understood now, had been for grief. But Lucy did not need a frozen father today. She needed the man Vera had married, the one who took flawed proofs apart, in front of rooms full of people who thought they knew better. And that man, it turned out, was still entirely intact, waiting in a drawer, 5 years unused and undiminished. Sophia found him at the back, with a slim folder held against her side. The score sheets, the originals and the adjusted versions, both, and a look on her face that said she had crossed a line she could not step back over, and had decided she didn't want to. "I pulled them," she said quietly. "Both sets. Whatever you're going to do, do it before she gets that boy on the stage, because after that, it gets a lot harder." On the stage, Dr. Vivian Crane stepped up to the microphone, tapped it twice, and welcomed the audience to the award ceremony with a smile that had gotten her through 100 mornings like this one. She thanked the sponsors. She thanked by name, and at length Bradford Kane and the audience applauded, and Kane inclined his head. She said a few words about excellence and young minds and the future, and then she said that before they announced the champion, she wanted to recognize the extraordinary difficulty of this year's final problem. A problem so demanding that as ever no competitor had produced a fully correct solution. And Adam Walsh from the back of the auditorium in his worn jacket said clearly, in a voice that carried all the way to the stage, "That's not true. My daughter solved it. And so did the person who wrote your answer key, except they made a mistake, she didn't." Every head in the theater turned. Vivian Crane's smile did not falter because she was good, but her eyes found him across the room, and Adam met them, and he began to walk down the center aisle toward the stage, toward the board, holding nothing but the truth and a 12-year-old's scratch paper. "I asked one question this morning," Adam said, as he walked, his voice easy, filling the room. "And I was told I wouldn't understand the math. So let me understand it, out loud, for everyone. It'll only take a few minutes, and I think your sponsors and that camera and every parent in this room deserve to see it." Vivian Crane had spent a career controlling rooms, and she reached for that control, now leaning into the microphone with the practiced warmth of a woman redirecting a nuisance. "Sir, I understand you're disappointed on your daughter's behalf, but this is a ceremony, not a venue for... You announced 30 seconds ago that no competitor solved the final problem," Adam said, still walking unhurried, and the evenness of his voice was somehow louder than shouting would have been. "That's a factual claim about mathematics made into a microphone in front of a news camera. I'm going to test it. If I'm wrong, you'll have embarrassed a tutor in front of a full house and you win the day. If I'm right, everyone here is going to want to know why a correct solution was marked as a 0. He had reached the front now, and he stopped and he looked up at her. "You can hand me the marker, or you can explain to that camera why you won't." It was the trap she couldn't see the shape of until she was already inside it. Refusing would look exactly like fear in front of the sponsors and the parents and the lens, and Vivian Crane's entire authority rested on never appearing afraid. So she did the only thing the moment allowed, which was to smile tightly and gesture at the large whiteboard beside the stage, the one meant for displaying the champion's name, as though granting a small indulgence to a fool about to destroy himself. "By all means," she said, "show us." Adam Walsh took off his worn jacket, folded it once, and set it over the back of a chair. Then he picked up the marker, and he turned to the board, and the theater went quiet, in the way rooms go quiet, when they sense before they understand why that something real is about to happen. He wrote the final problem across the top in a clean, fast hand. And then he solved it. He did not solve it the way the answer key did. He solved it the way Lucy had, because it was the better way, and he narrated as he went in plain language, translating each step into something the parents and the camera could feel, even if they couldn't follow the symbols the way a great teacher makes a hard thing look inevitable. He showed the insight the problem turned on the single elegant move that unlocked everything, and he showed how once you saw it, the rest fell open like a door. It took him a little over 4 minutes. When he set the marker down, there was a complete, correct, beautiful solution on the board to the problem the championship had sworn for years that no child could solve, and the silence in the theater had changed temperature. "That's the solution," Adam said, turning back to the room. "It's correct. Any mathematician here can check it, and I'd welcome them to. Now here's the part that matters." He picked up Lucy's scratch paper and held it up. "This is my daughter's work, submitted today. It follows this exact path. The same insight, the same structure, the same correct answer. She's 12, she had no tutor, and she found a road to the solution that is more elegant than the one your own judges were given." He let that sit, and it was marked wrong, a 0, which dropped her out of the medals. A murmur was moving through the auditorium now, the particular sound of a crowd rearranging its understanding of what it was watching. "But I want to be fair to your judges," Adam went on, and he reached out a hand without looking, and Sophia Bennett, who had come down the aisle behind him, placed a page into it. "Because maybe they were working from a flawed reference. Here's the official answer key. The championship's own solution, the one handed to the judges." He held it up beside his board. "There's an error in it. Third step. The reasoning breaks right here, and if you follow it honestly, the official solution doesn't actually work. So the situation is this. The championship distributed an incorrect answer, key, then used it to fail a child who was more correct than the key was. You didn't just get the scoring wrong. You marked the truth as a mistake because the truth came from the wrong kid." Bradford Kane was on his feet. "This is absurd," he said loud, reaching for the authority that had never once failed him. "You can put anything you want on a board. That doesn't mean—" "Mr. Kane." Adam didn't raise his voice, and it cut through anyway. "Every serious mathematician in this room can verify what's on this board in about 2 minutes, and I invite them to write now out loud in front of everyone. If I'm wrong, say so." He looked out at the audience, at the several parents who had gone very still, because they too knew the subject, and not one of them stood to contradict him, and the silence was its own verdict. "No, then let's stop pretending this is about whether the math is right. It isn't. The math is settled. This is about why it was scored the way it was." And that was when Sophia Bennett stepped forward, pale and steady, and did the bravest thing Adam had seen anyone do in a long time. "I'm a judge," she said to the room, her voice shaking only a little. "First year. I evaluated some of these solutions this morning before the final review. I want to tell you what happened to the scores after we handed them in." She opened the folder. Dr. Crane took the sheets for a final adjustment alone. When they came back, 2 students had been revised upward and 3 had been revised downward. I have both versions here, the originals and the adjusted. She held them up side by side. The students revised up include Tyler Kane. The students revised down include Lucy Walsh and Danny Brooks. The pattern is exactly what it looks like. I stayed quiet this morning because I was afraid of what speaking up would cost me. I'm not willing to stay quiet now. The theater erupted, and in the noise Adam watched Vivian Crane's face do the thing he had been waiting for. The thing that happens to a certain kind of person when the room they've always controlled turns underneath them. It was not tears, and it was not panic. It was the specific, rigid stillness of someone calculating whether there is any exit left, and discovering in real time that there is not. Her authority did not drain out of her slowly. It simply stopped being hers the moment the people she had counted on to defer to her began one by one to look instead at the board and at the score sheets and at the 12-year-old in the 3rd row who had solved the impossible problem and been failed for it. And then Vivian Crane made the mistake that people like her almost always make at the end, which was to defend herself with the truth. "Do you have any idea what it takes to run something like this?" she said, and she had turned from the microphone, but the room was silent enough now that it didn't matter, and the camera caught it. "Every year I hold this together. The sponsors, the venue, the scholarship. All of it runs on money, and the money has expectations. You think this championship survives if I hand the trophy to a scholarship case and a tutor's daughter over the boy whose father funds half of it?" Her voice was tight with a contempt she could no longer conceal. "These 2 children were not going to change their lives with a middle school medal. Tyler Kane's family was going to fund this program for another 10 years. I made a practical decision. Someone has to be willing to make them. It landed in the theater like a stone through glass. She had, in trying to justify herself, confirmed all of it in her own voice in front of every parent and the lens of the local news that she had knowingly failed correct work from children she had judged to be powerless in order to please the man who signed the checks. There was no walking it back. She had said it out loud. Adam let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said quietly, without triumph, because triumph wasn't the point and never had been. You said someone has to be willing to make that decision. You're right. Someone in a position of authority holding a child's future in their hands has to decide what to do with it. You decided the ones without powerful parents didn't count. He glanced back at Lucy and at Danny Brooks, who was staring at the stage with an expression of dawning disbelief, a kid who had spent all morning being told without words that he didn't belong, and was now watching a stranger take that lie apart. That's the only real test any of us gets. Not what we do for the people who can fund us. What we do for the kids who have no one to speak for them. You failed it. In writing. On your own score sheets. What happened after happened quickly, the way these things do once the load-bearing lie is pulled out. The results did not stand. They couldn't. The evidence was on a board that any mathematician could verify in a folder of the championship's own score sheets and in Vivian Crane's own recorded words. Under the eyes of the room and the camera, the final standings were reviewed on the spot by the other judges, the ones who had not been part of the adjustment, and the correct results were restored. Lucy Walsh's solution was recognized for what it was, the best in the competition. Danny Brooks was restored to the placement his real work had earned. The trophy did not go to Tyler Kane, and the boy who Adam was careful to note had done nothing wrong himself, who was as much a passenger in his father's ambitions as anyone, left the stage quietly. And Adam felt no satisfaction in that part, because a child was never the target. The consequences for the adults were not quiet at all. A rigged scholarship competition, exposed on camera with documentary evidence and a confession, is not a thing that gets swept back under a marble floor. The Regional Mathematics Association opened a formal investigation before the week was out. Vivian Crane was removed as director and barred from any judging role, and the questions that followed about how the scoring had been manipulated, about whether the arrangement with the championship's largest donor crossed from favoritism into something with a legal name, did not stay inside the association for long. Bradford Kane, who had spent the morning certain that his money made him untouchable, discovered that a public record of buying a child's competition is the kind of thing that follows a man into every other room he cares about, into his business. His board seats the civic honors he collected, like trophies of his own. Sophia Bennett, who had risked her young career to say what she saw, found that the association's honest people made sure she had a place in the sport's future, because integrity once demonstrated in public turns out to be a rare and valuable thing. And Adam made sure Danny Brooks did not disappear back into the corner they'd tried to leave him in. He spoke to the association himself about the boy's work, made sure the right people saw what Danny had actually done, and when a genuine scholarship opportunity materialized from the wreckage of the compromised one, it was Adam who quietly made sure Danny's name was in the room. He had not walked into that theater to save only his own daughter. He had a long memory for the look on a kid's face when a room decides he doesn't count, and he had promised himself watching Danny that morning that he would not fix his own child's injustice and step over another's on the way out. In the lobby afterward, when the crowd had thinned and the camera had gone, Lucy came and stood in front of her father, holding the small, worn notebook she carried everywhere, the one that had been her mother's, full of Vera's handwriting, and the beautiful problems Vera had collected across a lifetime. Lucy had never let it out of her sight. She looked up at Adam with an expression he hadn't seen before, because she had just watched her quiet father walk to a board and do something extraordinary, and she was reassembling in real time who he was. "You never told me," she said, "that you could do that." Adam knelt down to her level. "I didn't want you to win because of me," he said. "I wanted you to know You did it yourself. Because you did, Lucy. Everything on that board today you found first. I just said it louder. He touched the notebook in her hands, Vera's notebook. Your mom found the beautiful road too. You've got that from her. Don't ever let a room full of important people talk you out of trusting it. Lucy threw her arms around him, and over her shoulder, Adam looked at the emptying theater, at the board still covered in his handwriting, at the part of himself he had kept in a drawer for 5 years, and had finally, for the best possible reason, taken back out. He did not know yet whether he would go back to any of it, the lectures, the journals, the name. But he knew he would not be putting it all the way back in the drawer again, because there were more Dannys out there than anyone wanted to count, more kids being quietly told they didn't belong, and it turned out he was still someone who could do something about that. The world is full of rooms where the people with the most power decide in half a second who is worth their attention and who can be waved away, and they are wrong about it far more often than they will ever know, because real ability has never once announced itself through a nice coat or an expensive car. But the deeper lesson of that afternoon was never really about who Adam Walsh turned out to be. It was about what the powerful choose to do with the small and the voiceless when they think no one is watching, because that, in the end, is the truest measure of a person there is. Anyone can flatter the child whose parent funds the building. Real character and real leadership is how you treat the child who has no one, and whether when you hold even a little power over someone who cannot fight back, you use it to protect them or to use them. So here's the thing worth carrying with you: never look down on the quiet person in the worn jacket. Never assume the person you've decided is nobody has nothing to teach you, and if you are ever the one holding the power in the room, be the kind who lifts up the ones with no one to speak for them. If this story stayed with you, follow along for the next one, because you truly never know who is standing in front of you or whose child you just underestimated.